Week 2 of the au pair affair trial, and the prosecution rests, painting Brendan Banfield as a married man desperate to escape his life and create a new one with his live-in lover, the family's au pair.
He basically said divorce was not an option.
Prosecutors call him the mastermind of a chilling plot to kill his wife and frame a stranger for murder.
Shot someone. There's a 34-year-old female that got stabbed by someone, and then he shot him.
Courtroom cameras zero in on Brendan as they replay police body cam video and the moment he'd learned his wife had not survived.
Your wife has died. She died of blood loss. Her airway was actually okay.
And in a breathtaking moment, the prosecution calls its final witness, the victim's father. But instead of emotional testimony, jurors heard about Christine Banfield's childhood blood disorder, leaving more questions than answers.
Remembering Christine's childhood, did you observe any medical symptoms that gave you concern?
Yes, several bruising, bloody noses.
Did prosecutors miss the mark?
We haven't heard a single word from a single detective that was involved in the homicide division. We haven't heard any sort of credible evidence relating to what was espoused as a theory of catfishing for years now.
The defense tried not once but twice to get the charges tossed.
I don't have any evidence or showing that the Commonwealth has used any false statements, testimony that they knew to be false. So therefore, I'm going to deny your motion.
Then shifted its focus to officers who cast doubt on the so-called catfish theory.
So you were never told why you were transferred?
It was related to my work in the Banfield case.
So, who invited this man into the family home? The evidence and questions continue to mount as the jury prepares to weigh in on what comes next. Good evening. I'm Erica Gonzalez, and thank you for joining us for the case, Au Pair Affair. And we've heard from dueling forensic experts disputing whether or not the crime scene was manipulated, but the moment that took our breath away was when the prosecution called its final witness, Christine Banfield's father. And it's what he didn't say that still has us talking. Here's a look back at the developments from week 2 in court.
The prosecution rested its case on the heels of the testimony from Christine Banfield's father. This is the first time we've heard from this man since his daughter was killed a few years ago. His name is Gary Benson, and his testimony was peculiar.
Remembering Christine's childhood, did you observe any medical symptoms that gave you concern?
Yes, several bruising, bloody noses.
Tell me about the nosebleeds. What did you observe?
They were frequent and very hard to stop.
As a result of Christine's easy bruising and nosebleeds, did she need to take any precautions?
When she rode a bike, she had to wear a helmet, knee pads, hand pads. Same thing with rollerblading. She was one that when she was little, she liked to do all that stuff, but we restricted her from doing that because of all the injuries that she was getting like that.
Prosecutors never really connected the dots on why that might be pertinent evidence, and then it kind of stopped there.
A body camera video and audio take us to the hospital where Brendan learns that his wife has died. I want you to listen in on this with me.
Hi, sir. My name is Gina. I'm one of the doctors here. Your wife has died. So I think that she died of blood loss. Her airway was actually okay.
So you can see the expression on his face. And again, this is so notable because we rarely get the opportunity to have cameras in the courtroom. But you're seeing Brendan Banfield there, emotional, at times wiping tears from his eyes as that fateful day is relived for all to hear and see. Now, the day starts, though, with the defense and a motion to dismiss the trial, calling it tainted, saying that, they didn't put up evidence to support a catfishing theory and that they didn't even put up the lead investigator in this case. But I'm going to tell you, this is quickly shot down and the judge dismisses that motion. Lastly, it's a now reassigned detective in digital forensics who tells the court why he was moved against his will. Quote, "It was because of my work on the Banfield case." And this is something that the defense attorney John Carroll has been waiting to introduce since he gave his opening statements. Today, the story of an experienced detective in digital forensics was cut by accusations that his work was just wrong. Much has been made of a detective's analysis that Christine Banfield was the one who used her laptop to establish a sex fetish account. Well, today, that theory was cut down, and by more than just one officer. There were multiple who said that that theory was incorrect, that Christine had never visited a porn site, much less something to that extent, and that it's impossible to definitively pin a person to a digital device. We also learned that rumors were swirling within the Fairfax County Police Department when this case was coming together. And then it was the case of the dueling theories. We hear from homicide detective Leah Smith, who said that there were two theories in this case and, quote, we needed to get behind the right one.
For the investigation, catfishing is maybe how you got to a point, but what happened in the room, in the bedroom, that is really what you need to figure out. That's the determination of who would be charged in the crime of murder.
And she would later go on to say that it was the blood evidence that ultimately allowed them to bring charges against Brendan Banfield. A lot to digest in this week, too, but it was notably Christine Banfield's father on the stand that had us all shocked. We were waiting for this, what could have been emotional testimony that just wasn't.
I mean, this could have been a blockbuster moment for the prosecution. You've got a father on the witness stand at his daughter's murder trial, and we don't see a grieving father. There's nothing emotional from Gary Benson, Christine's father.
Right, he's talking so much about a blood disorder, but we never hear any about personal relationships. It's like, a baseball analogy when you know that you can swing for the fences, but instead you choose to bunt. That's strategy, right? I don't understand the strategy in this. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. Kristen, how do you see that? Why do you think their scope was so narrowed on this?
I think that overall this was a missed opportunity for the prosecution. Anytime you call in any member or friend of a victim, particularly of a slain victim like Christine Banfield, the purpose is to refocus the jury and to humanize the victim. In this case, it didn't happen. As you mentioned, there was no crying. There was no real analysis of her as a person.
Kristen, does it potentially limit the scope on cross-examination, though? If you do get into Christine's past, maybe they were trying to not step in anything?
There's nothing really to step into when you're crying as a father, when you're humanizing someone who has been slain. At the end of the day, the defense's narrative has got to be that Christine was a victim too. So in terms of trying to paint her as anything less than a loving wife, it wouldn't be in the defense's best interest anyway.
This also stood out to Dateline producer Marianne O'Donnell, who has her thoughts as well on how this shook out in the courtroom.
The father said she had a blood disorder, a blood problem. Sounds like a clotting problem. The other person who would have known that was her husband. I think what the prosecution is trying to say is that Brendan Banfield knew his wife would bleed out quickly. And if you remember the au pair's testimony, she said Brendan had her hang up on the first 911 call and then motioned to her when he was ready for the second. The implication is that he was waiting for her to bleed out.
You hear her saying to Brendan as he was stabbing her in the neck.
He was stabbing her in the neck. She was just telling him, let me go, I'm gonna die anyways. I'm gonna bleed to death.
And that's just one piece of the testimony this week. There were several hours of testimony on the catfish theory and multiple detectives who say they believe Brendan and Juliana set Christine up.
Yet the main forensic detective said the evidence did not convince him of that. So now the defense is suggesting there's some turmoil, there's some disagreement within the police ranks. Maybe some of that matters to the jury, but what it does not change is what truly happened inside of the Banfield bedroom when it became a blood-soaked crime scene.
This trial has unfolded like a game of chess, precise, calculated, and strategic. Let's go back to NBC News legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden to break down how both sides are building their case. Kristen?
Yeah, so as we approach the end of week 2, both sides are making aggressive moves to control that chessboard because, as you pointed out, this trial is just like a game of chess. For the prosecution, the key pieces are clear. Number 1, Juliana's inside story, connecting the dots. She is not a bystander. She admits that she fired that second shot. And the Commonwealth put her on to explain motive, to explain planning, and the execution of these murders. Then you have that second key piece, the bedroom makeover, right? The after picture. The au pair's items, including her red lingerie, shift right into that primary bedroom, and the whole house changes. Not proof by itself, but it certainly supports intent and control. And then that third piece, the crime scene evidence, the blood, its placement, and what the scene shows before it becomes a battle of stories. And then that fourth piece, the timeline anchors, using the calls and the surveillance to lock in the when, the who called who, and the what happened before the narratives harden. Now, the defense is playing for one outcome as well, and they're moving piece by piece. First, they're attacking Giuliana's incentive and selective memory, her motivations, with that producer bombshell as the centerpiece of that argument to show that she's got something to gain and a reason to reshape her story. Then they're trying to trade pieces and win on the doubt, and that dovetails us right into that second point, that the science was trampled, not staged. And that's the argument where the defense is saying that it's the first responders, the patrol officers, and the failures to properly secure the crime scene that explain all of those odd blood transfers and not a conspiracy. Then that third piece, the digital doubt package, with that disputed account control, the rogue detective, and let's not forget the reassigned detectives highlighting some turmoil within that police department specifically related to this case. And then that fourth and final piece, that missing and untested evidence, wherein the defense is really arguing that the Commonwealth cannot close the gaps because key items were not tested. Look, the defense does not need that perfect alternate story. They just need one juror doubting the evidence. So the prosecution is trying to set up that checkmate with corroboration, and the defense is trying to keep enough uncertainty on the board that the jury just cannot make that final move. Back to you, Drew and Erica.
Fantastic insight.
Kristen, thank you.
And we're going back and forth debating whether or not the prosecution might have missed an opportunity with Christine's dad on the witness stand. But then a huge piece of Christine's backstory made its way into the record through another witness. Today, Fairfax County Police Lieutenant David Giacchio was on the witness stand, and the defense was firing questions at him about this digital forensic evidence, questioning whether or not the catfish theory is supported by the evidence or if it was concocted by the cops. Giacchio testified that they actually backed up on Christine's devices. They were looking at her computer activity from 3 years prior to the killings to see if she was ever active on any websites like FetLife or something comparable. Listen to what he said on the witness stand today.
We reviewed Christine's history. I think it went back to the mid-2000s. She had never so much as visited a porn site that we could find.
Christine's devices showed no evidence, no history of ever engaging in sexual content online. The au pair testified that it was her and that it was Brendan using Christine's devices to execute the catfish of Joe Ryan, using the made-up Gmail account, then using that to set up FetLife, also creating a Telegram messaging account. But what was going on all of those apps and devices when Brendan and the au pair couldn't physically get to Christine's devices?
There were two occasions where the co-defendants were out of town for 48 to 36 hours, and none of the accounts, the CB 920 at Gmail wasn't used, the FetLife account wasn't used, the Telegram account wasn't used. It seemed unusual to me that that wouldn't happen while they were out of the house.
That's definitely interesting there. The other thing that happened today, and you and I have been trading places between courtroom coverage and then TV coverage all week long, and there was this moment today that I stepped away to go on air, and then right after you called out to me, Erica, hey, come over here. You got to see this. You got to hear this.
Yeah, I think my jaw was still on the floor at that moment. So late this afternoon, a woman named Sally Fayez took the witness stand. Sally is the head of victim services with Fairfax County Police. They provide support services to victims of violent crimes. Well, immediately after the killings, Brendan, Giuliana, and the Banfield's 4-year-old daughter, Valerie, were moved out of their home and into a hotel where officers were stationed around the clock. Sally testified today that within just a couple of days after the killings, one of those officers at the hotel overheard a conversation that changed the entire course of this investigation.
What was it that happened that raised in your mind the question of Christine having been set up?
At the hotel. So from my understanding, we had an intel detective in the lobby of the hotel that we had everybody in, and she had asked Juliana, "Can I call you mommy now?"
When you say she, who are we
I'm
talking
sorry,
about?
Valerie. Said,
Valerie, Christine's daughter?
Yes, said, "Can I call you mommy now?" Juliana, again, I don't remember her answer. She said yes. And then she said, are you going to marry my daddy? And Juliana said, "I wish."
I don't even think you have to be a parent to have your heart ache for this little girl, that regardless of the outcome,
yeah, that took all the air out of the room. Yeah. You knew that something was happening even before these killings.
Right. All right. Well, when we come back, I'll look at the surprising moments in court and what we can expect next week on The Case. We have every angle of this court case covered for you, from our reporter inside the courtroom to expert analysis and our producers who are live blogging this whole thing. Drew, let me start with you. Week 2 coming to a close. What stands out to you?
There's no question it's been a difficult start for the defense presenting its case, and the longer they go without scoring any kind of win, the more probable it gets that they could put Brendan Banfield on the witness stand. That's always a huge gamble for any defense strategy, but they just might need it.
Our NBC News legal analyst, Kristen Gibbons-Fedden. All right, Kristen, what stands out to you?
The takeaway of week 2 is that the case is finally shifting from shock value testimony into a fight over the proof. We finally heard from Brendan Miller. And while originally he stood by his assessment that it was Christine who created that FetLife account, the prosecutor was able to elicit testimony that he couldn't say that definitively or conclusively, scoring some major points for the jury.
Every keystroke of week 2 in our live blog. I'm sending it now to the producers. Surprise moments, guys?
This case is going by really fast. The prosecution wrapped up in 4 days. Now it's the defense's turn. Even the judge says they're ahead of schedule, but it's a race against the clock. They're trying to get everything wrapped up and get as much as they can in before winter weather arrives.
I've been watching every moment of this case, and I've been really taken by Brendan's demeanor. Most of the time, he's stoic. There are other times when he writes notes pretty feverishly. The only time we saw any real emotion was when they played the body cam video where he learned his wife had died, as well as some other 911 calls.
What surprised me was the prosecution really was lackluster in their ending this week. They talked to that bloodstain expert, the bloodstain pattern expert.
So when you see that, finding any other DNA profile in there would be difficult to explain in terms of the scene.
And it was so technical. I think the jury was so bored, and it really surprised me how they didn't really end with a bang.
Continuing coverage of the case, Au Pair Affair, streaming in our NBC Washington app, on NBCWashington.com, and on our YouTube channel. And don't forget about our live blog. So it is back to court tomorrow, but we are looking at a lot of snow and a jury that's potentially out a few days, maybe a week. So how could that all play into this?
Right, so normally we don't have trial on Friday in Fairfax County, but Penny Ascarati wanted the jury back tomorrow so we could try to beat this storm that's coming in. So you got to wonder, does the defense try to stretch this all the way and leave the jury with 4, maybe 5 days of something to think about? We'll see.
Thanks for watching.
See you next week.